Queen stood at the great window of her throne room and watched her empire burn, not with fire but with something worse. Words, whispers, the slow poison of doubt that spread through her court like a disease. She was young for a queen, only 40 cycles old, barely an adult by standards. Her mother had died too soon, leaving her a crown and a kingdom of wolves. The noble houses circled her throne like hungry beasts. They smiled at her in court and plotted against her in shadows. Every day brought new challenges to her right to rule. "You must take a consort," her advisor OK said for the 100th time. "The houses demand it. They say a queen without a king is a ship without an anchor." Turned from the window. Her silver skin caught the light of the 3 moons that hung in the sky. Her eyes, deep purple and ancient, held the weight of her crown. "Every suitor from the noble houses would bring his own agenda," she said. "If I marry Lord, his family controls my heirs. If I choose Baron, the military faction gains too much power. There is no safe choice." "Then choose an unsafe one," OK replied. "Choose someone so far beneath politics that he cannot threaten you." Laughed, but there was no joy in it. "And where would I find such a creature? Every man of importance has importance precisely because he has ambitions." The answer came 3 days later, in the form of a human diplomatic vessel. Had heard of humans, of course. Everyone had. They were the new species on the galactic stage, barely a century into space travel. They were soft, short-lived creatures with fragile bodies and limited technology. The galaxy considered them harmless, useful only for minor trade and labor. Nobody feared the humans. Nobody respected them. The delegation came to discuss trade routes through space, met with them out of politeness more than interest. She expected nothing from the meeting except boredom. But then she noticed him. He stood at the back of the human group, quiet and unassuming. He was not tall or handsome by any standard. His brown hair was plain, his face was ordinary, and his body showed no signs of strength or power. He wore simple clothes and carried a small notebook that he wrote in constantly. "Who is that one?" asked her aide quietly. "Cole, Your Majesty, a cultural. He studies alien societies and writes reports. He is of no importance." No importance. The words struck like lightning. She watched Cole throughout the negotiations. While the other humans talked and argued and pushed for advantages, he simply observed. He smiled at the servants who brought drinks. He asked a guard about the artwork on the walls. He seemed genuinely curious about everything and hungry for nothing. After the meeting, did something that shocked her entire court. She invited the human to have tea with her privately. Cole sat across from the most powerful woman in 47 star systems, and he did not seem nervous at all. He was not bold or arrogant. He simply seemed comfortable, like a man who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. "Why do you study cultures?" asked him. "Because every species is a miracle," replied. "Billions of years of evolution, countless choices and accidents, all coming together to create something unique. I think that is worth understanding. Most humans I have met are more interested in profit than understanding." Smiled. It was a kind smile, warm and genuine. "Most humans are scared. Fear makes people greedy. I decided a long time ago that I would rather be curious than afraid." They talked for 3 hours, asked her questions that no one had ever asked before, not about her power or her policies, but about her. What did she enjoy? What made her laugh? What kept her awake at night? Found herself answering honestly. She did not know why. Something about this strange, soft creature made her feel safe. When he left, she made her decision. The proposal shocked everyone. A queen of the Dominion marrying a human, a creature from a species that most considered barely more than clever animals. The noble houses exploded with outrage. Her advisors begged her to reconsider, but saw what they did not. Cole had no connections to any faction. He came from a species with no power in her empire. He could not threaten her throne because he had nothing to threaten it with. He was politically speaking, perfectly safe. She presented the offer to directly, without games or deception. She explained her situation. She told him she needed a consort who would not betray her, and she believed he was the only candidate who had no reason to do so. Listened quietly, then he asked for one day to think. When he returned, his answer surprised her. "I accept," he said, "but I need you to know something. I am not accepting because of power or wealth. I have no interest in ruling anything. I accept because when you explained your situation, I saw something in your eyes." "What did you see?" "Loneliness," said simply. "You are surrounded by people who want things from you. I thought maybe you could use someone who just wants to help." Did not know what to say. She had prepared for negotiations, for demands, for conditions. She had not prepared for kindness. "What do you want in return?" she asked. Thought for a moment. "A small garden where I can grow vegetables from earth, and permission to continue my research in your libraries. That is all." "That is all. That is all." The wedding was a grand affair, though seemed uncomfortable with the attention. He stood beside her at the altar, this small and ordinary human, and he spoke his vows in her language. He had learned it in 3 weeks. She later discovered he had a gift for languages, one of several small talents he never mentioned. That night, after the guests had gone, sat with her on the balcony of her chambers. "I know this marriage is political for you," he said. "I do not expect romance or love, but I want you to know that I take my vows seriously. I will stand beside you. I will support you. I will never betray you." Studied this strange creature, who was now her husband. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you bind yourself to someone you barely know?" Looked out at the stars above her empire. "Because everyone deserves to have someone in their corner," he said. "Someone who is not playing an angle, someone who just wants them to be okay." She did not believe him. She could not believe him. Her entire life had taught her that everyone wanted something. But watching him smile softly at the stars, she found herself hoping for the first time in years that she might be wrong. 3 cycles passed, and Cole became invisible. Not truly invisible, of course. He was always there, a quiet presence in the corners of the palace. He attended every court function, every diplomatic dinner, every ceremony that required the queen's consort to stand beside her. But he did it so quietly, so gently, that most people forgot he existed the moment they looked away. The nobles called him the soft one behind his back. Sometimes they called him worse things to his face. Lord once spilled wine on at a banquet and laughed about it with his friends. Simply smiled, cleaned himself up, and asked Lord about his daughter's upcoming wedding. By the end of the conversation, was telling secrets he had never shared with anyone. Watched these interactions with growing curiosity. Spent his mornings in his garden. He had transformed a small courtyard into a strange paradise of earth plants. Tomatoes hung red and ripe from wooden frames. Green beans climbed up strings toward the alien sun. Strange herbs with names like basil and rosemary filled the air with scents that had never smelled before. She visited him there one morning and found him on his knees in the dirt, carefully tending to a small plant with yellow flowers. "What is that?" she asked. "A squash," said. "It is being stubborn. The soil here is too acidic. I'm trying to convince it to grow anyway." "You talk about it like it is a person." Smiled. "Everything wants to live. Sometimes you just need to help it find a way." She sat with him in the garden, watching him work. His hands were gentle but confident. He moved with a patience that seemed impossible for such a short-lived species. "The nobles mock you," she said finally. "Does it not bother you?" "No." "Why not?" Wiped dirt from his hands and looked at her. "Because their opinion of me does not change who I am. I know what I am. I know what I value. A man who is secure in himself does not need the approval of others." Thought about this for a long time after she left. In the afternoons, disappeared into the palace library. He read everything he could find about history, culture, and politics. The librarians grew fond of him. He brought them tea and asked about their families. Soon they were showing him documents that had not been opened in centuries. In the evenings attended court functions. He never spoke in official meetings. He never offered opinions on policy. He simply stood near, a warm and steady presence at her side. When she felt overwhelmed by the games and lies of politics, she would glance at him and find him smiling at her. It was not a smile of amusement. It was a smile that said, "I am here. You are not alone." She began to rely on that smile more than she wanted to admit. But something else was happening too, something did not understand at first. Problems started solving themselves. A trade dispute with the merchant guild that had dragged on for months suddenly resolved. When asked her trade minister what had happened, he said that had shared tea with some junior merchants, and somehow everything had worked out. A brewing scandal involving House quietly disappeared. Later learned that had taken a long walk in the gardens with the old patriarch and talked about for 3 hours. Her spymaster, a hard and suspicious woman named began including new details in her intelligence reports. Details that no one else had access to. When asked where the information came from, looked uncomfortable. The human consort sometimes shares observations, she admitted. He notices things. People talk to him. They say things they would never tell anyone else. Why do they talk to him? A thought about this carefully. Because he listens, and because they do not think he matters. Began watching her husband more carefully. She noticed how his eyes moved during conversations, tracking everyone in the room. She noticed how he positioned himself at gatherings, always near the edges but always with a clear view of the exits. She noticed how he remembered every name, every face, every small detail that anyone had ever shared with him. She found him one night in the library reading military histories. Not histories, human histories. The books described Earth's endless wars. The strategies were brutal and efficient. The weapons grew more terrible with each generation. The casualty numbers were staggering. Humans had killed more of their own kind than many species had members. Looked up at her with his usual warm smile. "Would you like to join me?" he asked. "What are you reading about?" "An old war on Earth. It was called the Second World War. Very interesting tactics." Looked at the images in the books. Burning cities, massive armies, weapons that could destroy entire islands. "Your species is very violent," she said carefully. "Yes," agreed. There was no shame in his voice but no pride either. He spoke like he was describing the weather. "We have always been violent. It is in our nature. We try to be better. Sometimes we succeed. Sometimes we do not. You do not seem violent." Closed the book gently. "I am not when I do not have to be." She waited for him to explain. He did not. She said slowly, "What were you before you became a cultural?" He met her eyes directly. For just a moment something flickered in his gaze, something old and deep and dangerous. Then it was gone, replaced by his familiar warmth. "I was many things," he said, "but that was a long time ago. I am just a gardener now." She did not believe him. She was becoming certain that the man she had married was not who he appeared to be. But watching him return to his reading, his face calm and kind, she found that she did not want to push. Part of her was afraid of what she might discover. And part of her, a small part that she did not want to acknowledge, felt safer knowing that her gentle husband might be more than he seemed. The Festival of Moons was the most sacred celebration in the calendar. For 3 days, the palace guard was reduced to ceremonial numbers. The nobles gathered in their finest clothes. Music and laughter filled the halls of power. It was the perfect time for an attack. The first explosion hit the communications tower at midnight. The second destroyed the main gate. By the time the third bomb tore through the guard barracks, the palace was already in chaos. was in her chambers when the attack began. She heard the explosions and immediately knew what was happening. The Crimson Veil, the coalition of exiled nobles and foreign mercenaries who had sworn to destroy her. They had been planning this for years. She grabbed her ceremonial blade and ran into the corridor. Two of her personal guards were already dead. A third was fighting three attackers in dark armor. She joined him, cutting down one enemy before the guard fell with a knife in his throat. Ran. The palace was a maze of smoke and screaming. Bodies lay everywhere. Some were guards. Some were servants who had simply been in the wrong place. The attackers moved through the halls in organized groups, killing everyone they found. She thought of her gentle husband with his soft hands and his kind smile. He was somewhere in this nightmare, defenseless and alone. The thought filled her with a grief she had not expected. She had not realized until this moment how much she had come to care for him. She had to reach the command center. She had to organize a defense. But she also had to find. She could not let him die alone and afraid. She turned a corner and found him. Stood in the junction where three corridors met. Around him lay bodies, 12 of them, all attackers, all dead. He was holding a weapon he had taken from one of them. His clothes were torn and stained with blood that was not his own. His posture was different. His shoulders were squared. His feet were planted in a fighting stance. His eyes were cold and focused in a way she had never seen before. As she watched, 3 more attackers came around the corner behind him. Did not look. He heard them coming by the sound of their footsteps. He spun, dropped low, and swept the legs out from under the first man. Before that man hit the ground, had already broken the second man's neck with a twist of his hands. The third man raised his rifle, stepped inside his guard, slammed a palm into his throat, took the rifle from his hands and shot him in the face. The entire fight lasted less than 4 seconds. Turned and saw watching him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Are you hurt?" asked. His voice was calm and steady, professional. "No," she stared at the bodies around him. "What are you?" More sounds of fighting echoed from nearby corridors. Checked his weapon and moved to stand beside her. "We need to get you to safety," he said. "How many guards can you rally?" "Answer my question." Met her eyes. The coldness faded slightly, replaced by something that might have been sadness. "I was retired," he said quietly. "I really was retired." "Retired from what?" A group of attackers appeared at the end of the corridor, raised his rifle and fired 5 times. 5 bodies fell. He had not missed a single shot. "Come on," he said. "I will explain later. Right now I need to keep you alive." They fought their way through the palace together. Led the way, moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for his small body. He killed without hesitation and without emotion. Every movement was precise and efficient. He wasted nothing. Was a trained warrior. She had studied combat since childhood, but watching work, she understood that she had never truly seen killing before. What he did was not fighting. It was something else entirely. It was an art form that turned violence into pure mathematics. They found survivors along the way, guards who had hidden or fled, servants who had armed themselves with kitchen knives, organized them with quiet commands, turning chaos into order. By the time they reached the command center, he had assembled a force of 30 fighters. The command center was besieged by 100 attackers. It should have been impossible to break through. Studied the situation for exactly 12 seconds. Then he explained his plan. It was simple and brutal and terrifying. 20 minutes later, the command center was secure. 60 attackers were dead. The rest had fled into the night. When it was over, sat down heavily against a wall. The coldness faded from his eyes, and for a moment he looked exhausted and sad, like a man who had visited a place he never wanted to see again. Knelt beside him. "Tell me," she said, "tell me everything." Was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft. On Earth, there are soldiers. Most of them are ordinary people who serve their time and go home, but some of them are different. They are taken young and trained in ways that most humans cannot imagine. They become weapons. They do things that are never spoken of. They complete missions that never officially happened. You were one of these weapons. I was one of the best. There was no pride in his voice, only truth. I served for 20 years. I did terrible things in the name of my country, and then I could not do it anymore. I walked away. I buried that person. I became a cultural who loved books and gardens and peaceful conversations. But that person is still inside you. Looked at his hands. They were still stained with blood. He will always be inside me, he said. I cannot kill him. I can only choose not to let him out. Took his bloody hands in hers. Why did you never tell me? Because I wanted to be something else for you. I wanted to be the gentle man with the garden and the library books. I wanted to be someone worthy of peace. And now, looked at the bodies around them, at the destruction and death. Now you know what I really am, he said. A monster who learned to pretend he was human. I understand if you hate me. Thought of the man who grew vegetables and remembered servants' names. The man who smiled at her from across crowded rooms. The man who had single-handedly saved her empire tonight. I do not hate you, she said. I am terrified of you, and I am grateful beyond words. She helped him to his feet. The Crimson Veil has foreign backers, she said. This fight is not over. Nodded. The coldness crept back into his eyes, but underneath it she could still see her husband. The gentle man was still there. He was just no longer alone. Then we will finish it, he said, together. The security footage spread across the empire like wildfire. Someone had leaked the recordings from the palace attack. Millions of watched in stunned silence as the Queen's human consort, the man they had mocked and dismissed for 3 years, destroyed elite soldiers with his bare hands. The noble houses demanded answers. The military high command demanded explanations. The common people whispered in the streets about the soft creature who had hidden a storm inside his gentle smile. Sat in his garden, tending to his tomatoes, while the empire went mad around him. Found him there 3 days after the attack. He looked tired. The shadows under his eyes were darker than usual, and his movements lacked their usual calm confidence. The War Council wants to meet with you, she said. I know. They have questions. They have many questions. Carefully tied a plant stem to its support. They want to know if all humans are like me. They want to know how dangerous your species really is. They want to know if they should be afraid. Should they be afraid? Looked at her with those eyes that could switch from warm to cold in an instant. Yes, he said simply, they should. The War Council met in the Great Hall 3 days later. Every general, every admiral, every noble of importance gathered to hear from the human who had saved their queen. At the head of the table sat old General, the hero of a dozen wars, who had once called the queen's pet, in front of the entire court. Entered the hall wearing simple clothes, no armor, no weapons. He looked exactly as he always had, small, ordinary, harmless. He walked to the center of the room and stood calmly, while 100 powerful people stared at him. You have questions, said. His voice was soft, but it carried through the silent hall. I will answer them honestly. You deserve to know who you are dealing with. General leaned forward. What are you? I am a human being. Nothing more, nothing less. Humans are weak creatures. We have all seen this. They tire easily. They are fragile. They cannot survive in harsh conditions. Yet you killed 30 of our finest soldiers in a single night. Explain this. Nodded slowly. He had been expecting this. What you know about humans is true, he said. We are small. We are fragile. We live short lives. We have no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons. By any reasonable measure, we should have died out long ago. He paused, letting the silence build. And yet we are the most dangerous species on our planet. We hunted animals 10 times our size. We survived ice ages that killed countless other species. We spread across every corner of our world, from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. Do you know how we did this? No one answered. We did it because we do not quit. His voice hardened slightly. When a human hunts, we do not rely on speed or strength. We simply follow our prey until it collapses from exhaustion. We can walk for days without stopping. We can survive injuries that would kill most creatures. We heal from wounds that should be fatal. Our bodies are designed for one thing above all else: to keep going when everything tells us to stop. He began walking slowly around the room. On Earth, we have been at war with each other for all of recorded history. We have spent thousands of years developing better ways to kill. We have created weapons that can destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. We have built armies of millions. We have turned violence into a science. The council members shifted uncomfortably. Every generation of humans produces soldiers. Some of them are ordinary. Some of them are like me. We are taken young and trained in ways that break most minds. We learn to ignore pain. We learn to think clearly while everything around us burns. We learn 100 ways to kill with our hands alone. He stopped in front of General. I am not special. I am simply what humans become when we are pushed, when we have something to protect, when we decide that failure is not acceptable. His eyes narrowed. And the other humans, the ones in your diplomatic corps. Every human vessel that travels in space carries at least one person like me. Smiled slightly. We learned long ago that the galaxy is not kind to the weak, so we make sure that anyone who threatens a human has to wonder what might happen next. Is that a threat? It is a fact. We do not make threats, we make promises. The room was silent, turned and addressed them all. The compact backed the Crimson Veil. They believe they can destroy this empire and take your resources. They are wrong. Not because your fleets are stronger or your soldiers are braver. They are wrong because they attack something I care about. He looked across the room. I spent 20 years being a weapon for my country. I walked away from that life because I was tired of killing. I wanted to grow vegetables and read books and live in peace. But when someone threatens what I love, the weapon wakes up. He turned back to the council. The fleet is coming. You can try to fight them with conventional tactics. You might even win, but it will cost you millions of lives and years of war. Or you can let me help. Let me show you how humans fight. General stood slowly from his chair. He was old and a warrior who had seen more battles than most beings could imagine. He looked with new eyes. Then he did something that no had ever done for a human. He bowed, a deep, formal warrior's bow of respect. Consort, he said, what do you recommend we do about the fleet? Nodded. The gentle scholar vanished, replaced by something older and harder and infinitely more dangerous. First, he said, we need to understand something. To think they are fighting a war, they are wrong. Wars have rules. Wars have honor. What we are going to do has neither. He smiled, and for the first time, the council understood why humans were dangerous. It was not their strength or their weapons or their numbers. It was the cold, patient intelligence behind their soft and harmless faces. Let me tell you about a concept we have on Earth, said. We call it total war. The council listened in growing horror and fascination, as the humble gardener explained how to break an empire. The compact expected a traditional war. They had planned for fleet battles and planetary invasions. They had studied military doctrine for decades. They knew exactly how their enemy would fight. They had no idea how humans fought. The first sign of trouble came when their supply lines began to fail. Ships carrying fuel and ammunition vanished without distress signals. Convoy routes that had been safe for centuries became death traps. They sent investigators to find out what was happening. The investigators disappeared too. Then the intelligence leaks started. Battle plans that existed in only the most secure databases appeared in hands within hours of being created. Fleet movements were predicted with impossible accuracy. Secret communications were intercepted before they were even sent. The leadership grew paranoid. They began to suspect traitors in their own ranks. They started executing loyal officers based on suspicion alone. The fear spread through their military like a disease. Watched from the shadows and smiled. He did not lead armies. That was not his way. He worked with small teams of specialists, some human, who appeared in the Empire on ships that no one remembered arriving. They struck without warning and vanished without trace. They turned this own systems against them. 1 week into the campaign, they found that half their communication satellites had been quietly to send copies of every message to intelligence. 2 weeks in, insurgent groups began rising on 3 colony worlds. They were funded by money that could not be traced and armed with weapons that appeared from nowhere. 3 weeks in, the High Admiral died in what appeared to be an accident. Then another admiral died. Then a third. The fleet command fell into chaos as officers feared that simply accepting promotion might be a death sentence. Moved through this invisible war like a ghost. He coordinated operations from hidden bases, using communication methods that could not intercept. He knew their weaknesses because he had spent 3 years listening to people who thought he was too unimportant to notice. Lord, who had once spilled wine on and laughed, had talked freely about politics at a dozen dinner parties. Baron had mentioned his contacts in intelligence while trying to impress people at court. Every noble who had dismissed the humble human consort had given him pieces of a puzzle he was now using to destroy their enemies. Watched her husband work with growing awe. "You planned this," she said one night in his makeshift command center. "Not the attack, but everything else. You have been gathering information since the day you arrived." Looked up from his tactical displays. "I gather information everywhere I go. It is habit. I did not plan to use it this way." "But you could have." "Yes," he returned to his work. "I could have. That is why humans make people nervous." 4 weeks into the campaign, led his only direct mission. The Leadership Council had gathered for an emergency summit at a location they believed to be absolutely secure. They were going to discuss surrender terms that favored them, or perhaps a renewed offensive. They never got the chance to decide. Infiltrated the compound alone. He bypassed security systems designed to stop entire armies. He moved through corridors filled with guards who never saw him pass. He reached the council chamber and did what he had been trained to do. The summit was never held. When returned to the palace 3 days later, he found waiting for him in his garden. His tomatoes had ripened while he was gone. Red fruit hung heavy on the vines. "It is over," he said quietly. "They are sending an ambassador to negotiate surrender." "I know, the message arrived this morning." Watched him move among his plants, checking soil and inspecting leaves. "You killed them all, the entire Leadership Council." "Yes." "Does it bother you?" Was quiet for a long moment. He picked a ripe tomato and held it in his hands. "It always bothers me," he said finally. "Every death stays with me, every face, every name. I remember all of them. I will remember the council for the rest of my life." "Then why do you do it?" "Because if I do not, more people die." He looked at her with eyes that held decades of pain. "That is the math of people like me. We kill so that others do not have to. We carry the weight so that people like you can sleep at night." The surrender negotiations took 3 days. Did not attend. He spent those days in his garden, coaxing his plants to grow and trying to bury the weapon back inside himself. The ambassador came to see him on the final day. Was on his knees in the dirt, planting seeds for a new crop. The ambassador, a tall and proud creature who had led armies and conquered worlds, stood watching him for a long moment. "You could have destroyed us completely," the ambassador said finally. You could have taken everything. Did not look up, I could have. Why did you not? Because I am not interested in conquest. I never was. He carefully covered a seed with soil. I just wanted to protect something I love. The ambassador studied this small, dirt-covered human who had single-handedly brought an empire to its knees. You are the most terrifying thing I have ever encountered, he said, and you look like a farmer. Smiled, I am a farmer. I just happen to have other skills. The treaty was signed. The war was over. The Dominion was saved. That night, found on the balcony overlooking the capital, the city lights sparkled like stars, and the sounds of celebration drifted up from the streets below. She stood beside him in silence for a while. You never told me what you really were, she said. You never asked, and I wanted to be something else for you. And now, turned to look at her. In his eyes she could see both versions of him, the gentle scholar who loved books and gardens, the lethal ghost who could destroy empires. Somehow, impossibly, they were the same person. Now you know everything, he said. You know what I am capable of. You know what I have done. If you want me to leave, I will understand. Moved closer to him. She took his hand, the same hand that had killed so many, and held it gently. I understand you now, she said. I understand why humans are so dangerous. It is not your strength or your weapons. It is that you feel things so deeply. You love so fiercely, and you will burn down the galaxy to protect what you love. Squeezed her hand. I would, he agreed, but I would rather just grow tomatoes if it is all the same to you. She laughed. It was the first real laugh she had allowed herself in months. Above them, a human diplomatic vessel departed the planet, carrying news of victory back to Earth. In its wake, a dozen civilizations began quietly updating their threat assessments. The humans were not the harmless newcomers they had pretended to be. They were something far more dangerous, a species that could end worlds but chose, for now, to grow gardens instead. The galaxy watched the humans with new eyes. And everywhere, soft-spoken men and women with kind eyes continued their quiet work, waiting for the day they might be needed again. Pulled close and watched the stars with her. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild. We tend to our empire like I tend to my garden. We help it grow. And we hope that we never have to fight again. And if we do, smiled softly. The weapon inside him slept, but it never truly disappeared. Then we will be ready, he said. But until that day, I am just a man who loves his wife and his garden and his books. Rested her head on his shoulder. I think, she said quietly, that is the most human thing you have ever told me. They stood together on the balcony, the queen and her humble consort, watching the stars above an empire that would sleep safely tonight. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species whispered warnings to each other about the humans. Never threaten what they love, the warnings said. Never wake the storm that walks softly. Never forget that the gentlest hands are sometimes the most dangerous. Because when humans decide to fight, they fight until nothing is left standing. And they always, always win.